What does it mean to have an entity attachment? How does that relate to our own emotions and feelings and experiences? And moreover, how the hell do we get rid of them? Welcome back to the station. Let's jump in. So one of the things that comes up is as we go along this whole process within our own awakening upon our own spiritual path is this concept of entity attachments. Now the thing about that is that these attachments are internal. They're something that actually can affect us and influence us, especially along our own emotionality and our own reactivity. What that means is when we have ourselves in attachment, and by and large most of us do, it is an actual intelligence that has entangled and then ultimately integrated within our own field of consciousness, within our own inner and eternal intelligence. Which sounds kind of weird because when we talk about those concepts, we tend to think of it as in this pure state of awareness. Right? However, very much like leaving the front door open at the house, mosquitoes can come in, flies can come in, other things can come in. And when that door is open, all of a sudden the natural barrier that structure has provided, all of a sudden is compromised. And when that happens, well, that's when things can get connected, entangled, and then integrated within our own field of awareness. So, for instance, when we have a person kind of just doing their thing, right? One of the things about that is that person is in a everyday state, has effectively a field of consciousness. This is called a morphogenetic field. This is a natural barrier, very much like the house analogy, that keeps things out. Now the thing about that is that sometimes this natural energetic force field comes down. Times of trauma, high emotionality, things in terms of abrupt changes where that field actually blips out. And when that blips out, all the things around that may operate at a similar frequency of emotion, anger, sadness, shame, whatever that is, there is a connection that can be made between the person's own sensations and that of the entity attachments. And that's how it's then able to enter. Now with that, the thing about it is that it's not all consistent. I mean, just as you look right now upon this screen that you're watching, the space between you and the screen, the space that's around you between perhaps the desks or perhaps the other things that you find in your surrounding area, in that empty space are things, stuff. Whether we identify them as bacteria, sometimes viruses, there is an energetic equivalent to that. And these are the things that can attach. Now, as it blips out then, that natural field of consciousness, that natural morphogenetic field, when that integrity is compromised and it blips out, that's when something can get in. Now, those some things that come and can get in can be generally one of three, though there's more, but generally one of three things. We have one, it's basically kind of like a bacterium. So we're going to say just like a basic attachment. That's something that when it does come can actually affect us in a way that is more reactive. It attunes to that frequency of anger, of sadness, of shame, and it just comes in because that's effectively what it is. Two, we can have an attachment that is like, I mean, for lack of a better word, it's kind of like a ghost, right? Now this is something that has an intelligence of its own. It is a disincarnate entity that used to be a person and now no longer is, trapped in this in-between space, and can also come in to attach, to stick to, very much like walking through the weeds and you get those little stickers on your pants. When we have that again in a time of trauma or high emotionality, field blips out, something of like energy, and I'll explain that in a bit, of emotion can come in. And 3, I'll put this over here, it could be something that's more elemental in nature. Now, when I say elemental, I mean when you think about the elements of wind, water, fire, and earth, it can be an elemental intelligence as well. That one's much more rare. However, when we look at this in general, whatever is around us can attach within, and that line of connectivity and entanglement comes from our own emotions. Now, this is where the work of doing things like therapy or shadow work or things in our own emotional body really comes into play, because it's that energy of the subconscious mind that can ping out a signal. And when that signal is pinged out, then what inevitably happens is, again, something can find its way to us, entangle, become embedded and entrenched within our own field, and sometimes within our body. Now, as that happens, then we want to get this, out of ourselves, and quite frankly, out of our cells. And so as we look at that in terms of that release, and how do we purge, how do we allow these things to move on and beyond from our own field of consciousness, well, we want to look at that in terms of a place of counterbalance. So say, for example, anger. Say that you are being more reactive. And this is one of the first signs, is that we're more reactive in our lives. Often the circumstance doesn't necessarily necessitate the reaction. And that's where we might have an entity or attachment coming into play. The great thing about these entities is they give us a very clear direction of where some of the unhealed areas, the places of opportunity within our own lives exist, because it's all largely within the emotional body. Anger. So if we have something attached to anger, then what we want to do is flood ourselves with that opposite energy. And so when I think about it, then if anger is on one side, perhaps peace could be the opposite word. And as we look at that, then we're applying a certain degree of alchemy, looking at a counterbalance, sort of distilling an emotion down to its base fundamental core, and then taking its opposite to help to purge what's ever in there. And so say, for example, I'm dealing with anger. One of the things that I could look at then is cultivating peace. Peace could be a walk in nature. Peace could be meditating. Peace could be spending time with loved ones. Peace could be time in the ocean. Whatever that is, as I start to participate and then ultimately embody, pull that energy within inside of myself, then what tends to happen is whatever the attachment is begins to weaken. And that's when we're able to actually allow it to purge from our own bodies. Now, in that purging piece, so the first step is to, really observe and identify. Where are we reacting in our lives? Second step then comes to counterbalance, to create an inhospitable environment within our own field of energy that weakens that level of connection. Very much like loosening a knot in string. And as you do, it begins to come apart. And that's something that is not something that is not very difficult, yet it is when we are in that place of reactivity. Begin to loosen it, and then we can go through the process of release. And that process of release can be something as simple, dependent upon how deeply embedded this particular entity is, as a command statement. There are statements that I use to clear my field every day. It can be something like a ritual, like doing something, the burning of Palo Santo, ritual salt baths, for example. It could also be something in terms of going through harmonics. I use tuning forks pretty often, and that helps me to continue to bolster my own field integrity. Certain frequencies of love, of enlightenment, of peace can help in terms of the reduction and ultimately purging of that entity, amongst other things. Practitioners out there have their own ways. However, here's the thing about what my own personal feel on this field is that these attachments are opportunities. And until we're able to actually connect to where they connected to within inside of ourselves, then that's only going to continue to attract other entities as well. And so the thing that I would really highly recommend is that as you go through this process for yourself, and feel free to reach out for more information, to first really stick in that place of observation and awareness. You want to see, feel, and experience where within inside of yourselves these attachments are, and what inside of yourself is awaiting your own healing. Because until that happens, Until this here is resolved, then something else will come in. And the removal, the transition of this attachment will only be short term until the core wound and energy is resolved. Now, I know that's a lot of information. However, hopefully this provides you a little bit more in terms of how you can better work with your own self, your own energy, and the entities that may be attaching to you right now. Love and aloha, take care, and ahui ho.